thank all of our portfolio companies which are attending this, as well as other organizations which partner with us, as well as founders, CEOs, and other members of folks in the SaaS community. I will tell you, stating the obvious, that we're at a very unique time, and organizations around the world are struggling to find the right balance in their communications. And we are lucky to partner with Edelman on a variety of initiatives. And today we have Hugh Taggart, who is the Global Crisis Practice Chair, who will be taking us through some of the learnings that Edelman has and some suggestions as well on what the implications are for organizations around the world as we navigate, which I'm sure you will agree are unprecedented times. And so with that, I will turn it over to Hugh. And again, remember to please ask questions at the end. And then, and I of course forgot one thing. We have a brief survey, which we are going to quickly put out there for you to answer about communications. And if you don't mind, to please select one of these choices as your main challenge in COVID-19 communications. And as people vote here, we will be sure to get back to the group at the end with our findings. So again, let me introduce you, Taggart, with Edelman.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Christina. I would put a webcam up of myself, but I fear that I'm going to have two kids rolling into the to what is a makeshift meeting room and disturb the webinar. So forgive me that I'm coming through just via audio. As Gary says, I'm the Global Crisis Practice Chair at Edelman, and for the past 3 months, I've been leading Edelman's COVID task force, a dedicated global team of health, crisis, public affairs, investor and employee communication specialists to help clients just like you navigate some of the challenges that this virus is throwing at us. Since the broader publicity of the outbreak began in January, we've been advising chief executives, business leaders on a whole range of business and communications challenges. The nature of these challenges has changed in recent days as government intervention has become that little bit more severe. What was initially sort of triaging pockets of issues around travel and around events has moved into work around brand communications, purpose, and engaging a remote workforce. The ask of me today was to try and distill some of the learnings from our engagements with brands during this time. And I recognize that there are a wide range of companies represented on the call today. And while each industry and company faces its own set of challenges, we continue to observe several fairly universal best practices that I wanted to communicate. So my talk today is not intended to provide business advice per se, but rather outline some communications imperatives and a framework for engagement that you and your teams can use to help navigate through this challenging period. I think the best place for us to start is with findings from a recent trust survey we did, so that we're grounding our guidelines and decision making in some form of evidence. Hopefully you've got the Edelman Trust Barometer 2020 special report on your screen, and I'm going to take you through a series of slides pointing out some of the key findings. In January, we launched the 20th Edelman Trust Barometer, which looks at the global state of trust in the 4 main institutions: media, government, business, and NGOs. The team went back into the field in March, and I'm just having trouble clicking through. Here we go. Between March the 6th and March the 10th, in a number of different countries, 10 countries in fact, to test attitudes to the crisis and its response. We polled people in Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, South Africa, South Korea, the UK, and the US. And the common theme that came through is that people are looking for trusted information. Right now, there's a dearth of credible information for a variety of different reasons, not least due to the inaccuracy in social media and the politicization of the problem. The World Health Organization has said that the outbreak has given rise to a massive infodemic, which is an overabundance of information, both accurate and inaccurate, making it hard for people to find trustworthy sources and a reliable guidance tool when they need it most. Misinformation is spreading and spreading fast. As we know, some politicians are weaponizing this misinformation to advance partisan agendas, and they're doing that all around the world. So the findings of our report confirmed a lot of what we knew before, principally that business trust, that people trust business more than most voices during uncertain times. And as I take you through the findings, there are some clear pointers in here on what people want to hear. And it also confirms the role that business must play as a source of reliable and also timely information. So here are the 8 things that we learned from the most recent trust cut. The most credible source of information is employer communications. The Edelman Trust Barometer that was launched in January, as I said, showed that my employer was the most trusted institution. It finished 18 points ahead of business and NGOs, and it sat 27 points higher than government and the media. So building on this further, the coronavirus trust cut that we have just done has found that employer communications is the most credible source of information about the virus. As you can see on the slide, 63% said that they would believe information from their employer after only 1 or 2 exposures to that piece of information, versus 58% for a government website and 51% for traditional media. Over 1/3 of people said that they would never believe social media if it were the only place that they had seen a certain piece of information. The second finding is that the most relied on source of information is mainstream news organizations. The major news outlets are relied upon nearly twice as much as global health organizations like WHO or the national health organizations like CDC. Friends and family, like people like me or you, and social media lag really badly, with the exception of developing markets like South Africa. Young people rely evenly on social media at 54% and mainstream media around 56%, while older people in the 55+ bracket rate mainstream media as nearly 3 times more reliable than social media. Almost 3/4 of the people that we polled are concerned about fake news or false information being spread about the virus. The third point focuses on the most trusted spokespeople during the COVID crisis. Scientists and my doctors are the most trusted spokespeople about the virus, with 83% and 82% respectively. There is also a reliance on a person like yourself at 63%. Government officials and journalists are at the bottom of the rank at under 50% of trust. The CEO of my employer, so the person who's running my business, is at 54%, squarely in the middle of the bracket. 85% of respondents said that they want to hear more from scientists, but less from politicians. Nearly 60% of the respondents also worry that the crisis is being exaggerated for political gain. The fourth point is about the frequency and the need for frequent information. 7 in 10 respondents to our survey are following coronavirus news in media at least once a day, with 33% saying they are checking several times a day. Frequency rises substantially in markets such as Italy, South Korea, and Japan, all of whom have had major outbreaks, and that trend will no doubt continue in other parts of the world. Employers are also expected to provide regular updates. 63% of employees are asking for daily updates, and 20% of the people that we surveyed want communication several times a day from their employer. There's also a demand for health authorities to provide regular information on the prevention of the spread of the virus and where tests are available. And there's a critical role for business in all of this. My employer is deemed better prepared than my country at helping to solve this problem. In 8 out of the 10 countries surveyed, my employer is seen as better prepared for the virus than my country. And this finding is validated by the high trust in my employer to respond effectively and also responsibly to the virus. And what we are seeing here is that in times of crisis, who we trust moves extremely local and almost hyper-local. The sixth finding is around government and business and how they're expected to team up and in partnership. Neither business nor government is trusted to go it alone. There is twice as much trust in a combined business and government effort than in government combating the virus alone. And specifically, trust in government to lead efforts combating the virus jumps nearly 30% when it's paired with business. There's also high expectations of business to act, not just communicate. 78% of respondents expect business to act to protect employees and also the local community. 79% expect business to adapt its operations, including remote working, cancelling non-essential events, and business travel bans. Some of these things the governments have already taken out of businesses' hands. Business is counted upon to adapt its HR policies, to give paid sick leave, or prevent at-risk employees coming to work. The final finding is around employers sharing information. Employees want clarity on everything, from how many colleagues have contracted the virus, there's 57% of people wanted information about that, to how the virus is affecting the organization's ability to operate. Employees want to be informed beyond the effect of the company, including advice on travel and on how to stop the spread of the virus. They want to get this information via emails, newsletters, posts on the company website, and also phone and video conferences. And I dare say that that percentage of 23% has markedly increased in the last few days. So what does all this mean for you, and how do you turn this into action? Well, there's four key things, the way I see it. The first of which is prioritizing your employee communications. Employees look to their employer for daily updates. We've just seen this in all of the evidence that's come out of the trust report. You need to keep up a continual cadence on credible information. Your voice during this crisis is absolutely essential. But at the same time, you also need to act as an enabler, a convener, and also an amplifier of experts inside and also outside your company. There's a desire for you to be humble and overly communicate by tapping into scientists, doctors, national health authorities, and World Health Organization officials. To give you an example of what we are doing, Harriet Edelman, who runs the businesses, including Dr. David Nabarro, the Special Envoy to the World Health Organization for COVID-19, in all of the Edelman employee all-hand calls, and he's making Dr. Nabarro available to Edelman clients as well. It's really good to have clear spokespeople roles within your organizations. Some companies are already doing this, and they've deputized specific executives or experts to serve as official voices on this topic, and it takes some of the weight or the load off the general managers and the chief executives. They're also asking other leaders to stop posting about certain things. So for example, human resources or HR leads and other executives in more operational roles could own more of the communications around plans for remote working. And there's been plenty of examples for this, and some of you may have seen the Walmart CEO, John Furner, filming a live video update recently with their head of EVP, Julie Murphy, to explain the company's position and policy on COVID-19. And as we just touched on in the findings, where possible, giving safety updates ahead of business updates is also valued. Your employees want to hear more from you about their safety rather than the impact of the business. But I appreciate that over the coming days and indeed the coming weeks, there's going to be a need to communicate just where your business is at. There's some really good examples of this as well. CEOs from Hilton, Delta, Starbucks, amongst a number of others, have shared what they are doing to keep employees and customers safe before discussing material business impacts. It's important also to know your audience and to tailor the communications to where they will be best received. So consider new and different ways of connecting to employees, such as virtual town halls or Ask Me Anything sessions. I was speaking with one colleague today who's doing a series of one-to-one coffee sessions with people around the organization. Wherever possible, to facilitate peer-to-peer conversations between employees in different geographies and share tips around remote working and how people are coping at this time. One of the things that is being relayed back to us is just the importance of mental health and checking in on employees who might be living in different parts of the living in different parts of the world, checking in to make sure that they are okay. There's been several examples recently that have been publicly made available. For example, Twitter held its first virtual all-hands meeting using Google and Slack the other day. Weight Watchers have done a similar thing. And so in these times, it's really important to give your employees really clear, positive, and distinct direction. People want to know what they are meant to do in these times. It is absolutely clear, imperative that they get really clear and quite frequent communication from their business leaders. The second point that I just wanted to go into a little bit is understanding your place in the external conversation. And what I mean by that is, particularly around the media, if you have something useful, relevant, or action-oriented to add to the external conversation, then you should speak out. But if you don't, and your communication would potentially clog the channels or distract other more pressing information, then the best thing to do is just to sit it out. You should really lean into your experience and expertise during times like this. Think of how you can add value to the broader conversation without necessarily distracting from other important health-related or business-critical news. There's been some really good examples of this again. Many of the entrepreneurs have answered questions on LinkedIn to provide counsel. So Mark Cuban provided counsel, for instance, to small businesses to help them to try and avoid layoffs. And there's plenty of discussion topics around restructuring and other business continuity topics all across social media. If you're planning to speak publicly or to go on broadcast, often these are done via phone-ins rather than on camera. Keep your employees top of mind. You may have a specific topic or action that you want to discuss, but be prepared to answer any question, including anything about layoffs or how this crisis is going to hit your bottom line. And note that you should be giving your own employees any updates first before you're talking about them in the media. We've had a couple of cases where we're trying to advise clients to make sure that they're in a habit of sharing information with their employees before they're sharing with wider stakeholders. And really be vocal about what you're doing for your employees. Talk about the actions that you are taking without sending overly promotional messages out into the market. The third point is that your behaviours and actions really matter in a time like this. Be mindful and deliberate about your behaviour. Your words, actions, and the way you show up and carry yourself will carry real symbolic weight at this moment. People will remember how you acted. People will remember how you communicated and how you engaged with your stakeholders. Ensure that you're showing up for your employees and stakeholders, projecting empathy and calm. These are the things that I probably don't need to communicate, but you'd be surprised about what people sort of refer back to in some of these times. And I know that there's a hell of a lot of uncertainty going on at the moment, but if you can keep coming back to your employees and showing up for them, projecting that empathy, projecting calm, then it'll go a long way to calming the situation. There's another series of examples there. I mean, I think a really good example recently was the Eli Lilly chief executive, David Ricks, who shared a selfie from his own home office. Not that everyone wants to see your own working environments, but you've got to find ways that are going to connect with employees, employees of all walks of life and often in remote locations. Leading by example is extremely important, as I mentioned. Make sure that you adhere to your own company policies. It's easy to get distracted and go off and do your own thing, but working from home, social distancing, self-quarantining, examples of that and sharing these with employees goes a really long way. Expressing gratitude is a key point that is raised by my clients, and using your influence to call attention to people inside and outside your company who are doing essential and often in some cases life-saving work. The chief executive of IKEA, Jesper Broden, shared a really good LinkedIn article recently to thank his global teams for their leadership during this time. And the Sweetgreen chief executive, Jonathan Newman, announced his company would deliver free meals to hospitals in the city that they serve. All of these gestures of gratitude are extremely well received by your employees. The last point here that I want to just touch on is using partnership to further the societal cause and also your own commercial and business causes. We entered into this crisis with government, business, NGOs, and the media, particularly in the US, all operating from a trust deficit. Respondents in our trust survey gave institutions low marks on partnership to solve tough societal challenges. And there is really little confidence that business, government, or NGOs are capable of or even committed to partnering with each other. And so this is really critical context for where we're at today. To weather the pandemic, and as we face a mounting and dangerous wave of public panic across the world, trust in our institutions, in those 4 institutions in particular, is absolutely fundamental. Partnership, as our data bears out in the results that I have just shared with you, is what's needed to get there. In the last week, we've seen flashes of this cross-institutional partnership of a kind that I don't think we've seen since perhaps World War II. We saw glimpses of its promise in the White House Rose Garden earlier in March, when businesses like Quest Diagnostics, Roche, CVS Health, and they all announced their commitment to a dramatic scaling up of testing and facilitation. And more recently, you might have seen reports of General Motors, Ford, Tesla, and others retooling to rebuild much needed ventilators in some of their shuttered plants. There's also been talk of hotel chains turning empty properties into recovery wards for non-critical coronavirus patients. And all of these ideas come with, a great deal of complexity and also unforeseen challenges. But if the trend line we're seeing holds, it holds a lot of promise. And so don't be under any illusion. This is a once in a lifetime and once in a century perhaps ask to show that when partnered with government, business can really do some help. They can really bend the trajectory of this pandemic. And I think if there's one thing that came out of the trust data, both in January and our most recent cut, is that business has a really critical role in beating this virus. It plays a huge role in sharing timely and credible information with its employees, and that role shouldn't really go underestimated by anyone out there in the business fraternity. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Gary and Christina and see if there are any questions from the phones. Thanks.
Thanks so much. It was super informative, and I would say also very consistent with a lot of what we're seeing and hearing, but there's also some, I think, really critical additional actions that you pointed out that make total sense for organizations to consider. Do we have the poll results that we can show, Christina, quickly?
Yes, we do. Here, I'll reshare it. Can everyone see?
Excellent. So interesting top 2 that are tied there, just managing the speed at which things are evolving and deciphering truth from factual, coming from multiple places. I'll, if you don't mind, I'll start with just a quick question. When you see these 2 very clear, clear issues about the speed and the factuality, Hugh, can you give some idea of what would be the best tactics and strategies to really deal with this?
On the speed, I think you have to be really true to what your company and brand has been doing over periods of time. I think we have to over communicate in a situation like this, but we also have a responsibility to make sure that the communication that we're sharing with our stakeholders is factual and it's also credible. I think the businesses can speak on all of the factors that relate specifically to the business, the running of the business, its employees, how it's dealing with HR policies. But when it comes to scientific matters or medical or health matters, it's much better to defer to the World Health Organization or local health authorities to ensure that the information that you are passing on is received in the right way and is deemed as credible. I don't think what we can't do is moonlight as medical or health officials in these times, and we have to defer people to credible sources, so pointing them in the direction of the World Health Organization site and other health sites. But in terms of a cadence, I think you have to find a rhythm that works for your organization, one, but if you're in a big organization, then also your teams. And I think if it's anything like what I've experienced in the last week and a half, there's been a deluge of phone conversations, video conference calls, and I think you've got to find a regular cadence and a regular channel that you're communicating through so that people can expect information and they can check in regularly to find it. What they don't want is sort of unprompted, unguarded information that catches them by surprise. If you can signpost this information, if you can put those things in diaries and provide that certainty and provide that structure so that people can come to expect on the information from businesses. So hopefully that's addressed a couple of those issues in that answer.
Yeah, I also see here a question that was asked. It says, clients are struggling how to get back to their business messaging. How would you counsel? And I would add on to that question, I think that they're going to go through different periods of their messaging. What makes sense for their messaging and communications today versus in 2 weeks versus a month are maybe changing. How would you counsel your clients or any of the folks on the phone in terms of how to view their messaging here?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there are phases of this. And right now, I don't think the world wants to hear promotional sales or marketing messages per se. I think right now they want to hear, if anything, how you are helping to society, business, employees, or your stakeholders overcome or at least mitigate this issue. I think you've got to really, again, come back to the values of the organization. What is it that your business is actually trying to do? What is the purpose of your organization? And all of the in-kind commitments, the philanthropic work, the desire to partner with government, other businesses, those things are being well received by the community. But I think there's a period of time before companies can go into that sort of sales or product mode. And I think what we've seen is that there's been a bit of a backlash to the companies who are trying to overtly capitalize on this situation by pushing, by sort of mistiming their publicity and moving sort of more quickly into the product and sales messages. So I think for now it's about communicating your company purpose, being really true to that, and focusing, as I said, firstly on your employees, your most immediate stakeholders, and then to the outside world, but only communicating to the outside world if you think you've got something additive to the conversation and to society.
So, you know, one of the things that you were pointing out here had to do with companies partnering with the government, partnering with NGOs. Can you break down for people what the risks and opportunities are there, first and foremost? And secondarily, if you are, not every business is going to fit perfectly into the government or a particular NGO. How do they figure out where they should be partnering? I don't hear you, Hugh, if you're speaking.
No, it's a really good question, and not a particularly easy one to answer. I think some companies will have existing relationships with NGOs. Some will already have government partnerships and other business partnerships, and I think it's time, you know, it's more about reforming or reinvesting in some of those partnerships. And I think in terms of when you're forming new partnerships, you've got to look at organizations who share the same values as you do, and that they are communicating a similar but additive message to what you are doing. The risk is that you get the partnership wrong, that it looks sales focused, that it looks too commercial, that it looks like you're trying to capitalize on the situation. The opportunities, though, are that the outside world wants to hear from companies doing interesting things. They want to hear about businesses who are contributing to society. helping to provide solutions on the healthcare side, helping to provide solutions to people who aren't in as fortunate positions as others. So I think what we're seeing now is almost a radical transparency of corporate culture. And really your brand now is your corporate culture, how you are treating your stakeholders, how you are looking after your employees in times of need. And I don't think there's ever been a truer time for something like that. And so I think how you are seen to act right now will go a long way to shaping and building your brand in the coming months and coming years.
So I just want to remind everyone, if you do have questions, you can feel free to use the questions tab on the GoToMeeting or the chat tab to send those. I also want to ask you, Hugh, you know, one of the tried and true communications devices is press releases. And I wanted to get your opinion on how to use them, how not, or to use them at all during this period. Should we wait because the press is super busy on everything around Corona? Unless you have a relevant story, don't waste your time. How should organizations look at that issue?
Yeah, I think you have to be mindful of what the media is currently covering and what they're covering in your sector, what they're covering in your industry. But if you look at the front of the book, for example, the front of the paper or the heads of the broadcast, it is all COVID related. So unless you've got something interesting to add around that particular conversation, then I think you can forget about doing sort of really proactive, product-facing, market-driven comms. I think the press release itself is probably dying a pretty slow death. I mean, it still does play a role, but I think you've got to be quite clear as to what you are communicating and who you're communicating to, and is the media really the best the best audience for you to get this out? I think this is a great opportunity for businesses to go either direct to consumer, direct to client, or direct to business here. And there's a whole range of other means in which you can reach them. Utilizing your social and owned channels, for example, the website's becoming increasingly important, LinkedIn, in order to reach other peers in similar industries. So I think you've got to think about how you can remove that third party in this situation, because I think the media is providing, at the moment, almost acting as sort of and having an elevated responsibility. And their responsibility right now, particularly mainstream media, is to provide trustworthy, timely, credible information to people who really need it. And so think about whether you're going to be you're eating into that time, and look to other channels by which you might communicate.
Yeah, you know, so at one level, we're encouraging people to ensure to communicate, in some cases over communicate, but I think we're also at a time of unprecedented noise where people are inundated with emails and webinars and social, and their, you know, kids' schools sending them a note, and restaurants they've eaten at. And how do you cut through the clutter to get your message out there? What can you recommend as the best tactics today to do, as you said, which is not be tone deaf and to have a way of speaking here and communicating, but also realizing you got to cut through the noise?
Yeah, I think over communicating certainly to employees, and I say that if you're sharing information that is critical to them, the way that the way they operate, what it means for them from an HR policy perspective, health, pay, all of those types of things are crucially important right now. I think the best test of this is just what your audience is expecting of you right now, and what might they be expecting to receive from you during these times. Most of them are probably after reassurance. Is the business still going to operate? How am I getting my supplies? Is that supply chain open? Are they going to be operating at normal hours? And so I think you've got to be looking at information that is 1, informative, 2, might reassure, 3, might inspire, and find the ways in which you think are going to have triggers for your audiences. There is some brilliant content out there at the moment. There's some very funny content out there at the moment. You've got to choose the right time to use humor, use inspiration. But I think you've got to come back to, and you've got to think about what is the audience expecting of me right now, and what is the few pieces of information that I might be able to get across to them, and what are the best means that I can get them, and what channels can we deliver them through.
So you brought up humor. You know, I'll give you what I'm advising portfolio companies on right now is to avoid humor, primarily because it's hard to get it right and there's risk to get it wrong, and the environment is changing so rapidly. You know, under what circumstances does humor even make sense in communicating right now?
I think only if it works for your brand, only if it's in any way reflecting of what your brand. I think humor is probably the wrong way. I think humor is probably, in terms of what people are sharing together, that's more to keep up spirits. I think on a person-to-person level. In terms of business, yeah, you've got to think about what is true to my brand. What kind of tone do we normally communicate through? What are the values of the business? Some brands are better than others at using those, at using different forms of humor to communicate through, but now is probably not the time. And you've just got to check everything. You've got to put everything through a filter right now. What are my audiences going to expect? What are we hoping to achieve from this piece of communication? What's the risk if we get it wrong? And what's the opportunity if we get it right? And you need to go through a pretty rigorous filter. And I think it's times like this when you don't just need the comms team looking at this, you need all members of all parts of the business sort of having an eye on the communication to make sure that it's hitting the mark. And yeah, I would suggest caution at this time for companies. So be true to your brand, be true to your business, and yeah, and just make sure that it goes through a proper filtering process before you distribute anything. Yeah.
One of the things that seems to be true now, so more than ever, is just the global community here, and that, you know, every area is different dealing with this, but in different ways. Some more severely. Take Italy as an example currently, but you know, many other areas. Other areas are in a area of recovery. So I've heard, you know, anecdotally at least, that business is returning to Asia. You know, how should an organization deal with the global communications at this point?
Yeah, good question. I think it is quite difficult to communicate at this point in time, particularly when you're operating global organizations and you've got teams in multiple locations in different time zones, and they're also at different stages of the virus. I think there are some sort of things that the global organization can talk about, how they're looking after people, how they're approaching this particular crisis, what it means for the business, those types of things. But where it relates to individuals, where it relates to market conditions, those things need to be handled by in-market, in-country teams so that they can be absolutely specific about the information that's being relayed from the health organizations over there, the governments, the media, and that they don't sort of, they don't find themselves misconstruing information that might be coming from other territories. So I think the global organization might play a role in sort of setting the cadence, like I said, in some of the bigger, more holistic parts of the business, but then you would need specific in-country, in-market teams to be handling requests about where the business is at and how and business continuity. So that needs to be specific to the local market. And we've adopted a global task force here, and that's been made up of people in all geographies. And we've seen very, very different challenges faced by different parts of the world at different times. And we've been true to ourselves and made sure that we've got in-country leaders communicating specifically to those teams. And I think you've also got to use things like SharePoint, website, other ways of communicating with a global audience where they can receive information quickly and easily, but that it is tailored or to the specific markets.
I think Gary's audio may have dropped for a second. So I just want to.
I apologize. I was just saying that we are coming to the end, and I was going to turn it over to you, Christina. There was one question about recordings and slides, which will be available.
Yes. So thank you so much, Edelman, and everyone who took the time to listen today. We will, as Gary mentioned, be sending out an email after this, so keep a lookout for an email from Insight Partners, and hope to see you on the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.